For cheap games and to support my channel, please visit the link in the description below to g2a.com. Hey, what's up, Slunts Joker here. Allow me to formally welcome you to my Games of the Year award show. I say games because I feel it does an extreme disservice to the plethora of great games that have come into our lives during 2014. And this is the very same 2014 that will not be remembered as a banner year for gaming in any regard. If 2014 will be remembered for one thing, it will be the never-ending releases of disappointments, broken promises, and buggy games. Games with more bugs than Lindsay Lohan's crotch the morning following an award show after-party. But at the same rate, I am thankful for the never-ending cavalcade of big-budget AAA blunders, missteps, and outright fuck-ups. For without them, some of this year's best games and new intellectual properties may not have shined as bright if it wasn't for the mire of shit that big publishers like Ubisoft laid in front of us. But as gamers, we managed to fight through this year and come out at the end with some great new franchises that will hopefully keep us fulfilled for years to come. With that in mind, one game in particular embodies the power of gamers' voices being heard. There's been an outcry for the games of old that got many of us into gaming back on the NES or any other child of the 80s like myself, and to that end, Yacht Club Games came to the rescue with Shovel Knight, after a successful Kickstarter campaign that managed to raise over $300,000 when its initial goal was a mere $75,000. Shovel Knight is a classic 2D side-scrolling platformer very much in the vein of the fantastic DuckTales game for the Nintendo Entertainment System that became relevant once again recently with its very own HD remake. What Shovel Knight managed to do is get the little things right. For starters, the controls were absolutely spot on. Difficult platforming never felt impossible, as I always felt the character landed exactly where I told him to land, which meant that when I messed up, it was me making the mistake, not some shoddy game code. It really has some of the best platforming controls I've experienced in a modern game, alongside the likes of Super Meat Boy. I could talk all day about just how bloody good Shovel Knight actually is, but in closing I have to also mention the utterly perfect visuals. The developers even went as far as matching the NES's original color palette, which had been severely limited for its time. The soundtrack also gets an easy nod from me for Soundtrack of the Year with some of the best chiptune work I've ever heard. The bottom line is, if you haven't played Shovel Knight, you need to. The next game on my list was an easy one, Wolfenstein: The New Order. One of my most beloved franchises as a child, and some of my earliest memories of PC gaming were that of my father teaching me how to play on our old and trusty 286 computer. So when ZeniMax, the parent company of Bethesda, acquired the rights to the franchise back in 2009, and later announced a reboot to the franchise in mid-2013, I was a little skeptical to say the least. I wasn't quite sure if we were going to be getting a dreadful Bethesda game like Brink, or something polished and rather brilliant like 2012's Dishonored, which earned itself the title of Game of the Year. I was ecstatic when I sat down to play The New Order earlier this year to find the perfect marriage of the classic corridor shooters I loved as a child, only had been brought into the modern era with fantastic visuals, an unforgettable soundtrack, and some of the best animations I've seen to date in a first-person shooter. And if Machine Games had only gotten these three things right, it would have been deemed a successful reboot by anyone's standards. Certainly a hell of a lot better than Randy Dickford's quick cash-in attempt with Duke Nukem, but they also managed to throw in some stellar voice acting and a rather compelling story of the struggle of a small band of inglorious bastard-esque misfits coming together to take down the now worldwide superpower of the Nazi regime. It was everything I wanted in a single-player first-person shooter, and more. The next game on this list was an easy one to include. Alien Isolation from Creative Assembly is possibly the greatest single thing to come from the Alien franchise since the amazing sequel from James Cameron following Ridley Scott's original horror masterpiece. Alien Isolation managed to put players into a constant state of fear. Oddly enough, fear was not present at all in the development of this game, as they went against the grain of what a AAA survival horror game is supposed to be. There are barely any weapons to speak of, you don't get to kill much of anything, and the entire game you are squeaking and crawling through a semi-abandoned space station like a frightened schoolgirl. And in doing that, they managed to put the audience directly into the shoes of Amanda Ripley. Playing the game, I have never been so pants-shitting scared in all of my life. The ambiance of the isolated space station puts a real feeling of solitude in the player, and the wonderful sound design plays right into that. At times being so quiet, you can hear the gentle squeak of your shoe's rubber soles slipping across the metal floor. It's a truly breathtaking horror experience that every gamer should try, with the lights off and a good pair of headphones, if at all possible. Wrapping up this menu of delectable gaming delights is the very same game that I announced as my personal favorite for the first half of 2014. That game is, of course, the PC exclusive Divinity Original Sin from Larian Studios. Divinity came out of nowhere for me and had me hooked from the very start. Divinity Original Sin is a game I had been longing for without even realizing it. Divinity plays very much like a modern Baldur's Gate, only with a fantastic elemental turn-based combat system. A type of combat that I'm not terribly a big fan of, but Divinity managed to execute it so perfectly. The use of various elements and their effects on different enemy types always kept me on my toes and learning new things. Every battle felt like a chess match of epic proportions, and the addition of one of the best implementations of co-op I've seen in gaming didn't hurt one bit. The world of Divinity is also brought to life in a way I've personally never experienced before. Every character from your main protagonist right down to the local cheese artisan who is quite persistent about selling you a fine slice of Gorgonbear all have a sense of worth in the world around you. You could by all means decide to murder the cheese merchant and make the entire village of Sicil gather their collective pitchforks and come for your head. Trust me, I've seen it happen, and it didn't end well. And in that, Original Sin really does shine. Every person has a purpose, and one mistake could mean that you don't get to complete a particular quest or get a certain piece of loot needed to finish another. It isn't a broken game mechanic. It's a smart and well thought out RPG. And, dare I say, easily one of the best of the past decade, if not of all time. I also wanted to throw in a few honorable mentions of some other games that are definitely worth a look by any gamer, but I didn't feel quite achieved the level of prodigiousness that would warrant being on a Game of the Year list. The first game is Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. Call of Duty, or COD as the kids refer to it, really surprised a lot of people this year, myself included. They did a fresh take on the tried and true formula of its multiplayer combat, a risk that Sledgehammer Games took, and it paid off for them in spades. Having a decent single player with Kevin Spacey sitting front and center didn't hurt either. It really is a decent game, and I've even seen it on G2A for less than $20, a deal not to be missed for the hours of enjoyment one could potentially get from Advanced Warfare. Next up is Nidhogg, a game that, if judged by its cover, looked like just another indie game clogging up the front page of Steam. But it was on the front page for a good reason. Nidhogg is incredibly fun. In a nutshell, it's a 1v1 fencing game with an 8-bit art style. Nidhogg isn't going to win any graphics awards, but sitting down to play this locally or online with a friend is guaranteed to put a grin on your face. It's kind of hard to put a finger on what makes Nidhogg so good. Maybe it's just our natural instinct for competition and to be better than the other person. But one thing is for certain. Nidhogg is addictively fun, and it's worth picking up the next time it's on a Steam sale. Because the only thing truly holding back Nidhogg is its $15 price point. One more game that deserves notable mention despite having been in open beta since 2012 is War Thunder. War Thunder is an online multiplayer combat game previously featuring only air battles of period-specific planes from the various theaters of World War II. It introduced ground forces earlier this year in the form of some epic tank battles. When played in realistic or simulator mode, War Thunder is incredibly authentic to its time period and has serious attention to detail. From the tank and plane models themselves to the handling of those vehicles and the firepower they were able to put out. With plans to introduce naval battles in the future, and it's a recent addition of American tanks through its Steel Generals update, there is already a lot of meat on the bone in this World War II epic, with promises of only more to come. Rounding off my list of honorable mentions is one that a lot of people might say deserves to be a real Game of the Year contender. Of course, I'm talking about Dragon Age Inquisition. Now, don't get me wrong, Bioware delivered a solid game with decent mechanics and a beautiful open world for the players to explore. But where I felt Inquisition lacked was its soul, which it basically had none. The characters, Iron Bull excluded, were all very forgettable, and the story felt very humdrum. It never really managed to pull me in like Origins or any of the Mass Effect games. I didn't really value the lives of my party members because I couldn't find an emotional connection to a single one of them. This is something that Bioware traditionally has done better than anyone, but with Inquisition, it just kind of fell flat. So that's going to wrap it up for my 2014 Game of the Year Awards. I hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did, don't forget to stick a like on it below. It helps me out a lot. And if you're not subscribed already, why don't you go ahead and do it now, because I'm pretty fucking awesome. Other than that, I want to wish everyone a happy holiday and a happy new year. I'm going to go celebrate right now with my family and bring in the new year of 2015 and look forward to all the great games next year. I'll catch you slunts next time. Ta-ra!